You're listening to Your Rivers Are Wrong, the podcast. My name is Merle. I'm here with my good friend Dante, and we're here to build worlds and tell their stories. So sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Good morning, or evening, or afternoon, whenever you may be. Welcome back to the Your Rivers Are Wrong podcast. I'm one of your hosts. My name is Dante.
And I'm the other one, and my name is Merle.
And we're here, as we are every week, to talk about the wonderful whimsies of world building, the arts and aesthetics of setting up a setting and telling stories born from it. Oh, okay, cool. Got it. First try.
I'm proud of you, man.
All right, cool. How you been? How was your weekend?
Pretty good. I've been doing like the visiting family round. So a bunch of my family is in the same city. It's the city where I grew up in. So I did like a whole weekend of that. And now I'm socially tired, but it was very fun. So, I can build on that for a bit until I will do another weekend again. But yeah, it was nice.
Are these like the same relatives you visited like Christmas season, or is it like a totally different set of family?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. A bunch of family just came together at my mom's place. And then I also went to see like an old friend from the neighborhood that I grew up in. And she still lives there and I live in another city now. And it was her birthday. So we had like a sort of party. And then I had some food with my dad, which was also fun. And then it was Sunday and weekend was over. as it goes,
Yeah, I want to compare. Does your family like plan these sort of occasions ahead of time, or is it just kind of like a, hey, by the way, this is happening in a couple of days, like come through if you can,
I feel like you asked this question because your family is definitely the latter part of that question.
Why? What would lead you to believe that? That's crazy.
I don't know, Dante. Maybe like you're perpetually waiting for family things to happen every time we try to plan something in the weekend.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Like literally this weekend, like Friday night, my mom was like, "Oh, by the way, your cousins are coming over Sunday. Hope you didn't have any plans."
Because now you do.
Yeah, I was ready to like spend the afternoon, working on videos and stuff.
Dang.
But, I'm playing cards for hours. Still a good time, but not what I was planning to do.
It's bonding. It's important.
It's still good. Still fun. Does your family like plan ahead? Do they like make sure that everybody can make it?
Well, usually it's just because my mom and my dad and my brother all live in one city. So that's a nice doable round, So I just visit people and then I'm like, hey, this weekend I'm in this city. Please meet me because otherwise I'll be gone. So that's useful. But accidentally then this weekend also my aunt and my grandma came to my brother and my mom. So I just could sort of, how do you say that? Like come along.
Like drop
but
by.
But normally it's, drop by. Yeah. But normally it's just like, hey, I am going to be here. Let's combine things so I can see all the people that are also living here. That's more the way it goes. Yeah.
I'm in your zip. Do you have zip codes? Do you guys have zip codes?
Yeah.
Okay.
You wrote me letters.
Yes.
There was a zip code on there.
But there were so many. There's like the number isn't usually. Our zip codes don't have like letters.
Fair. Yeah.
So that was your zip. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Good to know.
The more you know.
Also, by the way, have you tried to memorize any more states?
I have done the base test that I shared with you. I forgot what my score was, but it was really awful. Hold on. Should I look it up? Yeah, this is important.
Yeah. Okay. So we didn't discuss this. Did we discuss this last time? I don't think so. No, you sent me a screenshot sometime last week.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Hold on. I found it.
All the states. How did you get Arkansas?
I don't know what went on in my brain there.
It might be and Massachusetts, two of like the harder states to spell. Like, how in the world did you get those over like, I don't know. Did you get New Jersey?
I honestly don't know because all the other ones, hold on. Let me check which ones I got. I got Alaska, okay. Arkansas. Yeah, Arkansas. That's weird. Okay, I don't know how I got that. Now that I think about it, that's really weird. I got California. I got Colorado.
Good.
Florida,
Nice.
okay, that one's easy. Massachusetts, which I like rewrote at least 6 times because all the S's are weird.
Massachusetts?
I didn't.
Yeah.
And then I looked it up and I'm like, I'm sure this is a state. Don't fuck me here. And then I looked up the actual spelling. So I cheated a little bit, not going to lie.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Michigan, New Hampshire, New York, North Carolina, South Carolina, Texas, Washington. That's what I got. And all the other ones, nope, no fucking clue.
And you learned that Dallas is not a state.
Yes, I learned that too. Yep. I realized as I was doing it that all the words that are in my mind that vaguely sound like American places are not all states. Like the European that I am.
I mean,
we got a good baseline going. But that's there's some work to be done here.
Yeah. We're making progress. I figured out where I discovered, I figured it out. I figured out where Sweden and Norway are. I didn't know.
Congrats.
They're way bigger than I expected them to be. They're
true.
like whole land masses.
Yeah.
You learn something new every day.
It's very true. Yeah. By the way, maybe good to know, and then we should really talk about world building instead.
Yeah.
One thing that I discussed with my family this weekend was that I learned all the world's countries that I did that earlier. And then my brother was like, oh, you actually talked about this in your podcast. And you know what I did right after? I learned all the United States of America. And I was like, what? You already did it? And he knows them now. So, I mean, I've got to up my game here. It's a challenge.
Yeah, it's like surprising and really, it makes me really happy every time I hear it. When I bring something up and people are like, yeah, I heard it in your podcast. I'm like, you heard it in our podcast?
What do you mean?
I was like overjoyed.
For sure.
Yeah.
It's such a wonderful idea that people are like, how do you say that? Like tuning in now. Like,
absolutely.
It's a tuning in-able thing that we're making here.
It's so encouraging.
I'm very happy about that. Yeah, it's super encouraging.
Oh, yeah. Speaking of a podcast, we're running one right now.
Oh, no shit.
Yeah. During this segment, we each bring a topic that we want to discuss about world building. Merle has one, I have one, and we don't tell each other what it is before we talk about it. That's kind of what makes it fun. I believe this week you're kicking us off.
Yes,
all
that's
right,
very
I'm ready.
true. Okay. Maybe not necessarily world building, but more storytelling related. Sure. I want to talk with you about villains. Because, they're the creamy, the juicy characters, the complicated ones. You gotta love them if they're good.
Did you just say villains are creamy?
I mean, are they not? I feel like they are.
Okay, well, we'll talk about it. Well, okay, so what is so creamy about villains? Do tell.
Okay, because here's my pitch. If done right, I very often love the villainous or complicated character, the antagonist, more than the actual main crew or the main character.
Fair.
And it is because either they've overcome stuff or they're super confused and then they fix their stuff or they don't fix it and you sort of get an insight into their confused mind. You know what I mean? I don't know. You gotta love it. And
they're so good.
Maybe to sort of link back a little bit, I got the idea for this topic from a video essay that I watched quite a few years ago, I think already. It's called With Eyes Unclouded, and it's super, super good. You should all go watch it. It's just on YouTube. And it's not necessarily talks about this one, but it talks about the correlation between the Ghibli film Princess Mononoke and the video game we already discussed, Breath of the Wild. And, aside from our entire villain topic, it's just a really good video essay. You should definitely watch it. But it really reminded me of the complicated villains that are in Princess Mononoke in the movie. I don't know if you've seen it, but there's a bunch of sort of very complicated godlike characters, creatures. But there's also a lot of human characters that are a little bit morally gray, like they're very compassionate, but then they're also very big and powerful warlords that, perform crimes of war and just kill thousands of people in the name of, a country or a city or whatever.
All right.
And specifically, the fact that I sort of got reminded of that through this video essay really got me thinking about what makes a character a villain, or when does a character turn into a sort of antagonist, you know what I mean? Because at some point, storytelling in itself, of course, you follow one character usually or a bunch of characters.
Mm-hmm.
But then in the sort of storytelling device that you use, or sort of the way a story is phrased, or the arc, you know, the tension that you sort of build into a story, usually the antagonist is also a character with, you know, ideals or wishes or problems or relationships, you know? And I'm always super interested in that sort of quite a fine line, I feel, the tipping point of a villainous character or an antagonist versus, you know, just a main character. Maybe I should stop there. I just want to know what your thoughts are so far, you know? Do you have like favorite villains, or have you thought about this before?
Yeah, sure. So as you were talking, it kind of like dawned on me as I was trying to figure out, like, you know, define a villain, right? A villain and an antagonist aren't necessarily the same thing, because a villain is someone who is basically defined by our own morals as bad, I guess would be the word we choose, like bad, like evil, maybe, leaning that way. But the villain of a story can also be the protagonist, like can also be the main character, or the perspective that we see the story through. Like we might realize somewhere along the line that they might be like the worst person in the story, therefore they are the villain. But they, as the protagonist would have an antagonist, which is not necessarily the villain. Maybe in their eyes, but not necessarily like in our worldview. So it comes down to like we're defining what a villain is, right?
Yeah.
And correct me if like you think otherwise, because this is just how I understand it. It's the bad guy, right? It's the person that does morally evil things.
Yeah.
Is that appropriate? Is there any like, am I missing something here? Like, is there a scope I'm not catching with that? Because I kind of am not sure if that's the exact description of a villain.
Well, here's already sort of the interesting part about this discussion. Like, if you are morally evil, is that sort of the equivalent of being villainous? Or can you be villainous and still be morally great or morally good?
Yeah, I mean, of course, yeah.
Is it a character trait, or is it,
One of the wonderful things about villains is that they can sometimes have this beautiful character arc where they go from a villain to an anti-hero to an ally, you know?
Yeah.
Like Dragon Ball does it every season.
That's actually true. Yep. I was thinking perhaps this also sort of links to the idea of what perspective does to a character. Yeah, it's already what you were kind of saying. Like, a main character can be the antagonist, but you're probably not realizing it because you're following it through their eyes, usually.
Yeah.
It's more gray when you have a first perspective on the quote-unquote villain of your story. And very often, the villain is not, you know, your first person, but the sort of looming cloud of doom in the background. It's this sort of, how should I call that? Like sort of the cause of the problem that the main character needs to solve. I'm already thinking, like, what would it mean if you have an antagonist that is his own problem, sort of? Maybe this is more of like a character study story then. Yeah, we could sort of compare it to maybe Zuko's arc from Avatar: The Last Airbender,
Absolutely.
Which is a great villain, of course, a sort of classic example at this point, I feel.
Of course.
But Zuko starts as the sort of classic villain, antagonistic character in, you know, the first season and throughout the series, in the beginning at least. But then because we start following more and more of his story through his eyes, and we have parts of the story that are completely unrelated to the main characters, we see what Zuko's going through or who he's meeting or etc., you know? And because of that change in perspective, we start to understand him more, and we start to zoom out a little bit and see how he is influenced by his environment and stuff like that, the same way we probably see with main characters. But because we're spending more time with them, we sort of start to understand their nature more, I would say. So
of course, yeah.
Does that instigate then his redemption arc? It's a little bit of a back and forth balance going on there, and I think it's super interesting. Perspective usually, in the sort of classic trope sense of how villains are portrayed often, is sort of the idea that, as I was already saying, they're in the background, they're sort of this big unfightable evil almost that is like sort of the final, well, the end boss of the series or the novel or the video game or whatever. And we don't get to know them until we're literally at their doorstep and we're ready to face them.
Yeah. I mean, even in Avatar, there are two different versions of villains. There's Fire Lord Ozai, who is from beginning to end, and in every novel and in every comic, he's just a bad guy. He's a villain through and through, flat character. He is the representative of evil in the story, right? And he never changes. You can rely on him to be evil, but you look at other quote unquote villains. You look towards Zuko. You look towards Jet partway through. You look towards Azula. They all have these complicated backstories, and as you gain more insights about who they are and what led them to those paths, you start thinking like, well, how they're acting is justified. Like that's how they were raised. That's all they know, And you can see that some characters hit their redemption arc, which is like Jet, which is Zuko, and even as Azula in the main series in all 3 seasons, on its culmination, she never gets that redemption arc. We feel more sorry for her than we do feel like she's becoming a good person and no longer a villain. She's the villain the entire path of the story. Yeah. But it doesn't mean we don't empathize her. It doesn't mean that she doesn't have layers. And there's a wonderful comic that came out after the series that goes into Azula's backstory and talks more about her dynamic with Zuko and the rest of their family. It kind of adds even more depth to a character that is primarily antagonistic as far as we know her. So I think what we love so much about villains is that depth of like, why are they villainous?
So do you then think that perspective or sort of the amount of time that we spend with a character or with an antagonist for that sense, or for that matter, is sort of equivalent to how much we can understand them? Like, would there be a way where we feel compassion towards the villain even though we don't spend the most time with them?
Off the top of my head, what comes up most prominently is probably like just superhero movies. Superhero movies only have that 2-hour block to introduce the villain, introduce their motive, introduce what led them there. It gives a quick backstory, and then finalize their arc. A lot of villains, especially in the Marvel universe, the MCU, are introduced and concluded by the end of the movie. And you see characters like Loki, who is one of the first villains of the whole, cinematic universe, is progressively given more and more time to have this redemption arc, and we endear ourselves more and more to that character. But there's some characters like Killmonger from Black Panther, who only had one movie to set himself up and explain his motives, but we all kind of got it, We kind of understood where he was coming from, even though he only because every time he breathed, every time he talked, he would tell us why he's doing things, why he sees things the way they are, why things are wrong, and he's trying to fix them. We're like, oh, you're kind of extra about it, but you've got a point,
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah, you've been through something, and we don't hate you. We hate what you're doing because of what you've been through. And that's what we kind of got to reconcile. Like, we get you are at your very core a good person trying to live up to their ideal. It just so happens that your ideals don't match up with mine, and sometimes that's just the world,
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Do you also then have villains that you like or maybe don't like that are just sort of inherently evil, but you like them anyway? Like, without sort of complicated backstory to make up for the fact that they're doing evil things?
Like, just villains that are cool just because they're evil?
Yeah,
This is one of the downsides of being surprised by a topic. I absolutely have. I'm looking around my room to see if I have.
That's all good.
I think the first things that come to my mind off the bat are probably Game of Thrones characters. You look at like a character like, have you watched Game of Thrones? Like, have you seen the whole series and all that? Or
I've started the first 8 episodes 3 times.
Okay.
Which is a whole different story, but
I won't talk too much about it.
You can definitely spoil it though, because I have tried it 3 times now, and I can't finish it. I appreciate it, but I can't finish it. So.
Yeah, no problem. There's a lot of good villains in that. There's a lot of bad villains in that. I would look first like the Hound. The Hound is kind of a grizzled, no nonsense mercenary type dude
Okay.
who just goes around and kills people for money, you know?
Sure.
And he is so blunt about how he sees the world and doesn't adjust for anybody. It takes multiple seasons of him interacting with one character for him to even like budge on his ideals. And then at the end of the series, he eventually just reverts back to what drove him in the first place, which is like family trauma and all that. Of course, his backstory is kind of filled out over the course of the seasons. But the moment you meet him, he's like, dang, that guy's cool. I get it. Like, this, I love his aesthetic. I love what he stands for. I love that he isn't wishy-washy and his motives aren't like muddy and weak. You know, there's a reason he's doing bad things. And he's from what he said, he's totally justified to do them. And he's good at it. And like an effective villain just does wonders for a story. Just someone who knows what they're doing, you know?
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
Like we said the same thing. I said the same thing about like main characters when we talked about that a couple episodes back. Just characters that know what they stand for and don't falter on it until like someone really pushes them to the brink or something really important or life-changing happens. I like confidence, I guess. You know?
That makes sense. Yeah. I feel like that's a sort of theme going on. Yeah.
Yeah. Like you look towards just a generally decent villain? Scar, Lion King.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
That character doesn't grow at all. He's the same from beginning to end.
That's true.
He hates his brother because his brother has everything and he has nothing, so he does evil things. Yeah, and he's pretty great at it. You know, like considering what happens in the movie. Should I put spoilers for The Lion King? It's like 30 years old.
I don't know. Yeah. Well, don't listen if we're doing it anyway.
He does evil things. What he does drives the plot line. He has an amazing song. Villains have all the best songs in Disney. And it's just like, that's a good villain, you know?
Maybe it's then about the sort of confidence of not being a part of things in a way. There's a sort of separate way of living if you're constantly doing evil things, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And if you can sort of bring that so confidently and live a sort of unmoral life so confidently, it's kind of interesting. And I think maybe that's why we sort of like watching them thrive a little bit too, if they're done well, of course.
Because we can't do that. Yeah. Oh, of course. The top villain of people's list, the Joker. We look at the Joker. That guy is a villain of villains. That guy is immortalized in villainy. What he does is crazy and just brutal. He just has a whole lot of brutal stories, and it's his yin yang balance with Batman and that dynamic, how they kind of strangely need each other to validate each other, you know, and just how he does things is so cruel and unusual that like he's painted his own throne in the hall of great villains, you know.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, for a good villain is just somebody who's memorable, somebody who leaves an impact, somebody who really pushes the main character to be someone better or someone greater, you know, push them out of their comfort zone, be the foil that the story needs to be compelling, you know. I
like that too. Yeah, it's sort of the wrinkle or the sort of mountain that has to be overcome in a way. And either if that's for themselves in the sort of Zuko sense that he's trying to sort of figure out why he is this or why he is his own problem, or if it's in the case of the main character where you're like, I perfectly am able to antagonize you and you'll be better for it. The thing you just described.
Right. Whether you like it or not, you're gonna grow up, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Honestly, I've never really looked at superhero movies that way because I'm not a big fan of them.
That's fair.
I mean, not that I hate them, but I don't know. I prefer other stuff, you know? But I like that sort of balancing act there. I never thought about it that way. That's pretty nice.
Yeah. Like from a storytelling perspective, there has to be a villain. There has to be someone who foils the perspective that the character is seeing the world from. Like real life. People don't agree. Like
it's like real life story.
Imagine there was
no shit. It's true.
You're right. It's like imagine there was a right answer to what's a better color, red or blue. Like people are never gonna.
That's the best description. Yeah. Dang. That's exactly what it is.
And that's
Yeah.
just a fact of life. Nobody's ever going to agree on it.
It's very true. Yeah. I feel like we can dive into this more, but it's a good sort of instigator because now I think like, oh,
absolutely.
there's so much more kind of villainy that I like initially thought about.
I mean, we could break down like movies. We could talk about specific villains. The topic could just be
That's
one
true,
character that we both know pretty well.
I
you
like
know?
that too. Yeah, we should do that in the future. Like we'll revisit
Yeah,
this
man.
at some point. Yeah.
Yeah. If you ever
Nice.
just want to spend an entire episode just talking about Zuko, I'm here for it. Okay.
Oh,
Just let
I
me
would
know.
not hate that. Let's make like a nice special thing out of it. Yeah.
The episode's called All About Zuko.
Zuko alone. No, that's a big ripoff.
It's not a ripoff. It's a reference. It's a reference.
We're like threading on thin ice here. Let's change
All right.
topics.
Let's change topics. Anyway, today, for what's supposed to technically be my topic, I wanted to kind of try something different. And I wanted to ask you
Okay.
a few questions on something you know about way more than I do, if you don't mind. Is
Sure.
that all right?
I'm intrigued
Cool.
now.
Now, I had to dig around for this because I had to check through our old messages. But I think I was able to pinpoint exactly the first time we talked to each other about our shared interest in world building. It was
okay.
almost exact. It was just about a year ago, somewhere in February. You were telling me, introducing me to Notion. How do you
right.
organize your notes about like the
remember
D&D
this.
campaign
Yeah.
and other things? Yeah. And I mentioned a website called World Anvil that I used for my campaign. And the conversation ultimately led to us sharing pictures about the maps that we've made for our respective campaigns. And notably yours, of course, were works of art, as your stuff usually is. So today, for my topic, I want us to talk a little bit about cartography.
Nice. Me love some good cartography. Bring it on.
If you don't mind, I want to ask you to reiterate for those listening in. How did you find yourself illustrating maps from scratch? Like, how did that start?
That's a nice story, I think. I was part of, I think around maybe like 14 or something, I stumbled across Wattpad.com, which is a site, I don't know if you know it, maybe. I think it's also like quite big in America.
I've seen Wattpad. I don't know what it is. What is Wattpad?
Okay. I think I was like Googling or something, free ebooks, because I am a pirate, like I am. And instead of sort of coming across a place like a sort of free archive or library for ebooks, I came across Wattpad. Because on Wattpad, what you can do as a user, it's sort of a community, social media-ish thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as a user, you can upload your own stories, and you can sort of per chapter, you can upload new parts of your story that you're writing, and people can read them for free and vote on it and comment on it, and you can read other people's stories. So it's a free sort of, I guess, storytelling platform. Little disclaimer, like 90% of it is fan fiction or gross.
That's fair.
So, you have to sort of accidentally find the right people to really have fun there, I mean, I'm not going to lie. There's
internet.
A bunch of fan fiction there. Yeah. Because I was interested in storytelling and, all the stuff that comes with it. And I was 14 and I had time. I just found a bunch of really nice Dutch fellow writers there. And we had like a nice clique of, I don't know, around 20 or so people.
Oh, wow.
And we just read each other's stuff and you really got inspired through there, right? So I think I did this for like 2 years or something, like intensively. And on Wattpad, you also have a place where you can upload a cover for your storytelling. And at some point, a little bit later in the time that I was involved in this, they also got a new update where you could insert visuals inside your chapter, right? So you could have like fancy graphics for your chapter title, or you could have like fake WhatsApp messages inside there if you wanted to, there was sort of this graphic element coming into there, which was super fun. And because I was so involved in this, I really like started making a bunch of graphic design for this just for the fun of it. And because people were like, oh, you can do this, right? Like you like covers and stuff. Can you make me a cover? So I did so many, like I'm probably like 80 or something covers for all
80?
kinds of people, completely free, very ugly
like
still,
10.
obviously. No, this is like My covers
80?
were at some point like all over the Dutch community. It was a thing. It was really fun, and I had a lot of practice of it. But at some point, I was like, "Damn, I really should like ask money for this because there's so much time involved." So that's how I got into graphic design, y'all.
That's way more than I expected.
That's a bunch. But I was there for like a little bit of time, right? So this is over time, and people upload and cancel stories all the time. You know, it's not like books. You can just cancel, or people don't get inspired, or they want to start something new. You know, it's how it goes. And then there's a lot of fantasy writers on there because a lot of people are, you know, like us, people that love Harry Potter and Avatar. And, you know, there's a lot of that fantasy YA genre is very active there. So when I started doing a bunch of graphics for these people and for my own stories as well, of course, I also eventually was asked for maps or for family tree graphics and stuff like that. So I really got through that. I got to make all the maps that I sent you for all kinds of stories and world building for other people and for my own stories as well, which was super fun. And then before I knew it, I was making fictional cartography. So
like, how did that go about? Did they like draw something out on like loose leaf and it's like, this is kind of what my continent looks like. It's shaped like a horse. There's mountains here. Like how did they pitch what their continent looked like, and how did you kind of piece that together into a cohesive form of art?
Right. Yeah. Usually the most like maps I did for other people were just like people sent me a very shitty photo of a very shitty sketch. And they were like, you can't read that part, but it says this. And here's the big city, and this one should be bigger, even though I didn't like illustrate it like that because I can't draw, you know. Of course, logical, because not everyone can or likes to draw. So I would have like a very shitty sketch that sort of outlined where what was, or where like boundaries of countries or, I don't know, mountain ranges were, etc. And some points were like, to tie it back into what our podcast is called, rivers are like super straight, and I know that it looks different on maps, or that it's prettier or more interesting. You know, I don't want to. I'm river-splaining people's maps here, but you know, river-splaining. I changed stuff up like that, or I asked like, what's the vibe of your story? For instance, I did one really fun project that was actually like published as an actual book like a few years later, which was super cool for my friend. And her story was very pseudo India inspired kind of, right? So the map I did for her was very much based in texture and in sort of ink bleeding in paper. And it was I wanted it to be sort of have the same vibe as the story, right? And another map I think I also sent you is one I made for my own story, where I knew that the main characters that would kind of use this map would be in a lot of sort of rainy environments. So I didn't want this map to be like thin paper, because that would make no sense, right? So I wanted it to look like leather, and I wanted to look, you know, weathered. So all the colors were super vague and a bit shitty, and I wanted it to look like it was carved in rather than just sort of, you know, written on there or something. You think of map making both in the way of, do you want it to be implemented by the people in your story? Like, do you want it to be part of the world, or do you want it to be just a sort of tool for the reader or the, you know, the watcher of your story? And then, of course, there's also like, why is this continent here? Like, of course, you can do that for your own story, but for other people, I never sort of judged like how they lay out things, because they obviously have their reasons for it. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it this way. Except for like super detailed stuff, like if a river is a little bit winding or if it's super straight, right? That's more of a design question than it is a sort of world building question. Yeah, so you kind of think about it that way, and depending on how much time you have, not gonna lie, this takes a bunch of work, because it's basically a very big detailed illustration, right?
Of course.
That also should look like it's a real place. But yeah, depending on the amount of time you have, you can really dig deep and sort of make it a very cool thing.
Yeah, that's so cool. I never thought about illustrating your map to make it appropriate to where the characters in the story would utilize it. That is so crazy to me. Like, for me, it's just like, oh, they're on paper, right? Let's just put it on paper. Let's brown up the edges, and it's a map, you know?
Sure.
I never thought about like, oh, it's got to survive rainforest or heavy downpours. Like,
I mean, it depends what you want to do with it, right?
Yeah,
like, if it's a tool to use in a sort of meta way, right? Like for yourself, or like maybe in one story, the main character has no idea where they are, but you still want to have a map there because it's just nice to have a map and you want to see where your story takes place in. Well, then, of course, it doesn't have to be a part of the story because the main character doesn't even know it exists. So
yeah. So have you ever, and this is something I think is really fun about maps. Have you ever made a map that's incomplete? Like purposefully?
Oh. Well, I think the one example for that is the quote unquote map, because it's not really a map yet. I just slapped a bunch of shit together. But this is the thing we talked about before already. Like as a DM, because this is a map for my D&D game that my current party is playing in. You don't really know how the world works until they go there.
Right.
So this is a map that I constantly change and have to sort of refill or change up places. And I still don't really know where everything is. Because sometimes I'm like, oh, this would be much more useful if this was like on the bottom of the coast instead of on the like northeast side of the coast. So you sort of shift around with it. But then at some point I do need some kind of reference to how far things are or how the sort of roads work, like the network of traveling works. But it's not really a map yet. So that's one that I'm constantly changing and editing. And I don't know how many versions I've done, but you know, at some point you just make like a super basic map because you know it's going to change. Like probably when my campaign is done, I will make a really nice one.
Yeah, I mean that
today, nope.
That's fun though. Yeah. Part of the fun of it is just like seeing how much the map has changed since you first gave it to your players.
Yeah, for sure.
I made a map right when the campaign started, and I only had like vague country names, region names, and like the town they started in or the island they started in. But now they know like a whole bunch of cities. They know like places underground and the desert. And I'm like, oh, it's kind of time to update this, isn't it? And I'm looking forward to just seeing how the whole thing populates. And
that's
like,
so
if it
fun.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's one of the most fun things, I feel. Because also, if you are super rigid about it, I think we talked about this already, but if you're super rigid about your world building, like prior to people actually experiencing it, there's no room for breath or air or sort of change.
Yes.
Or funny improv. It's a bit more stale, and it's way more fun if everything can shift because you allow it to. And I think it works the same with maps. But I did just think of one more example that I have. I'll do like the spoiler-free version of this.
Okay.
But I gave my players a map that they found. So it wasn't the world map, but it was a specific map. And certain information that you put on a map, you have to realize that maps or documents, physical paper that exists in the world, like information or books for that matter, like how they exist in your world, also is a dated thing and is a thing like our history books, you know, like our history books from like, I don't know, 1800 are probably wrong because we've lived 200 more years and we realize that things are wrong now or things happen differently or this is not even true or this place doesn't exist or, you know, things have changed. And what you can do if you use that in game, you can purposefully leave out information or have misinformation on there to make people realize that what they find is also sort of subject to the people that wrote it or the politics that were involved in, you know, whatever party was requesting this map. And that's also a really fun thing of sort of items that people can find or things that people have to work with, because you can definitely make players go a different way or have them think of it differently because you can use that. You know, the idea that history is not a stale thing, that also just people wrote the way they thought it was, or they had to write it because people were like leaning over their shoulder, you know? And that's really interesting too.
Yeah. Have you ever seen the geographically correct map of the world?
Oh, is this the one where the countries are actually the same size and stuff? Or the proper size? Yeah.
Yeah, because a lot of the naval maps are Eurocentric. Europe and by connection, like Africa and Asia, appear bigger on these maps than the rest of the continents around them. And then when you like properly size them to match like other places in the world, it looks strange. Because the original map makers made it from their own perspective, and you can see like certain things are skewed and prioritized. Yeah, that was wild to me when I first saw that. I'm like, oh, okay.
It's super interesting. There's actually a website where you can sort of drag countries over each other and they sort of auto calculate the sort of right size, so it changes size as you drag it, which is completely like your mind will be so confused. I forgot the name. I think you can find it if you look it up. But yeah, this is super relevant too. I didn't even think of this yet, but great that you brought it up. Because map making, specifically for, Earth or planet like, a sort of two-dimensional sheet of paper, can never completely represent something that is three-dimensional in a globe, which is why these sort of different perspectives and this sort of weird skewing and warping of countries happens, right? And there's all sorts of different types of map making. Like you have the world map that we know now, where I think Antarctica and like Alaska and Canada and stuff look super big, but then are way smaller because they are sort of stretched out because they're like around the North Pole and stuff. But you also have maps that are sort of like as if you would peel an egg. So you would have like triangles that are in a sort of specific shape that sort of tries to make it better. But then there's still this sort of distortion going on. What that means for if you have, to maybe stay a little bit into the fantasy, if you have a planet that looks a certain way, or if you want to have a space map, for sci-fi stuff. There's all kinds of three-dimensionality that you have to either purposefully or unpurposefully take into account when you're mapping it, because it will always mean that you prioritize, the way that you view perhaps the most important trade routes or something. If you want to bring those in your map most prominently or most clear, you have to find a different structure of map making. The perfect example is the underground map in London or in New York, I think also in all the big cities, the ones where they have like tubes and it's not even like realistic to where the places are in sort of the sort of northwest, east, south directions, right? But you just have this sort of representation of where the things are to make it the most easily viewable experience. And that's really what also graphic design is about. And what's super interesting, it's really sort of communication versus realism that you want to have a good balance with, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Communication versus realism that just hits it right on the head. Are you looking at the subway map to know exactly how far away one subway train is from another subway line? No, you're looking to see where they go.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter how big or how small or how narrow those tubes are. As long as it tells me exactly what I need to know, I don't really care about the specifics,
No, exactly.
If you think about it, like all of the maps that are rectangles are by default incorrect because you can't wrap a rectangle around a globe and make it like accurate,
Yeah.
Like there's always going to be little parts.
And even, the sort of small world globes, you can argue that they're wrong because they're not three-dimensional. They don't show the mountain ranges really in sort of the air.
Yes.
And there's also a difference in the distances. You can, if you drag a point from A to B, like directly south over a mountain range, it's going to be very different if you draw it on a two-dimensional map or, a globe-like representation versus if there's a literal mountain in the way. You can, of course, like overthink this stuff, but I think it's really, really interesting. And it reminded me of maybe one more thing to share.
Listen, you're the expert here. You fill me in. Yeah.
I've done like 4 years of school for this shit. Let's go.
Listen,
this is actually a thing that I was researching for my graduation project. And I had a really nice discussion with my teacher about the photography/art department of the NASA. So the space company. I don't know how to say this properly.
Space company.
Why am I even explaining NASA?
Let's go with space
NASA.
Company. No, that's good. I like that.
NASA, the space company,
Space Incorporated.
Space Incorporated, yeah, exactly. But my teacher was telling me that NASA has an art director that just works for them constantly to bring out, for example, the photography of the blue marble, the sort of famous image of Earth as seen from space. The sort of blue, cloudy planet that no one has seen before. And they published this first picture. And this picture is not a real picture. That's not an actual photograph. It's a sort of rendered image that sort of combines multiple, I think, satellite views or something. I'm not entirely sure. Where you can see clear skies. Because, of course, there's a lot of clouds in the way all the time. If you want to have like a full representation of, where you can see the land masses and stuff from afar, there's a lot of clouds and stuff in the way all the time. And also, it looks not as blue as we always think it looks. But because the art director of NASA wanted to make this image as understandable as possible, they sort of change up certain colors or, they edit multiple pictures together. They photo manipulate. But for the sake of understanding, like for the sake of communication, as we talked about earlier, because if it wasn't blue, maybe we would have no idea where we're looking at. And if we see or we recognize certain basic tropes like the sea is blue and land is usually green or brown. We can understand what we're looking at. And the sort of art direction that takes place into these kind of images, I was super baffled by, and I love that example so much. And I think it really shows also that sometimes you need to be irrealistic to correctly, quote unquote, portray something to make it understandable. And that's really what sort of the graphic design, should be about if it's done right, in my opinion.
Hey, we should put that on a t-shirt. That sounds great.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely love that. That it's like, it really matters who's looking at the map, who's the map for, and exactly how much realism do you want to preserve, or how much are you willing to forgo to make the map as useful as possible, or exactly to the needs of whoever's receiving it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think once you are able to start thinking about what the role of a map is for your story or your world, I think you can really make that super satisfying, nice extra step of like, who needs this, or who was this made for, or how it's used, and how does that change the map? For me, that's always the most fun thing to think about when you're map making, because then you can really sort of dig deep and sort of find the visual that you need to use for the sort of context that it is in.
Yeah, love that. That was a good topic.
Hey,
let's do it again.
I love
sometime.
maps.
That
We
was a
should
good
talk
topic.
about maps all the time.
I mean, we made a podcast for it.
Yep, that's true. That's true.
Yeah. All right. Let's bounce over to the last thing we do in every podcast. We have a world building prompt, bad world building prompt, whatever we want to call it. I believe this week you're tossing one to me. Could you explain that real quick? What this whole thing is about? What we do here? So
usually we get a sort of snappy sentence or an interesting idea, a prompt, as you would call it. We bring it to the table for the other to riff off and sort of find a way to make an on-the-spot, interesting world-building exercise. And each time we switch it up and we don't know what the other is bringing, which makes it very fun and interesting, and hopefully also spark some creative juices for the ones listening to this. For this time, I indeed brought something.
All right.
And it is this prompt that I'm going to read to you now.
All right.
I want you, super shortly, but I want you to build me a little town that is constantly plagued by winds from one direction, from the same direction.
Winds
from the north,
one,
for instance.
From the north.
And it's a pretty strong wind. Like, it impacts.
Sure.
What does that mean? I'm
gonna bring it. I'm gonna bring it right now. Okay, ready? This town is situated at the base of a mountainside. It was built as kind of a legacy town way before the climate changed recently. It was once a place full of lush greenery. Nowadays, ever since a cataclysmic event, it's totally shifted the winds of the entire world. And what was once vast fields of green have now become a wintry, desolate land. You can see that this town used to be very populous, but now no longer is. There's a bunch of empty houses dotting this, basically the valley of this mountainside. You can see that they have like a singular road leading through the mountain pass, from which they get all of their crops from the nicer side of the mountains, because the other side that receives the rainfall that comes from these wintry winds is, of course, lush and green and flourishing.
Sure.
So it begs the question, why don't these people move? Well, it comes down to legacy. They have, the people in this town, as I continue to build this fictitious little village, they have a story that they've passed down for generations. Basically, the head of the village, their great grandmother, once foretold that there would be a hero that rises from this specific village, this specific plot of land. Upon this earth, a hero is born to the world and changes the lives of millions. But should they ever move from this town, the prophecy never comes to fruition, and their situation becomes irrevocably worse than what it is now. So for the sake of the fate of the world, they choose to remain here. Now, of course, people not in the immediate family aren't entirely sold on this, and many families have moved to quite literally greener pastures. But it is upon one of the darkest nights when the stars are high in the sky and the moon crosses over the eastern horizon to disappear for hundreds of years that a child... Oh, this is basically the Bible. I'm sorry. I'm kidding.
No, I love it.
A child is not born from any resident within this town, but birthed from the ground. This is through the frigid permafrost that coats the entire village. And as the plant opens, it reveals a child, almost fey in nature. And from then, the world begins to change.
Oh my God. That's amazing, dude. I love it.
And there,
I can't believe you just did that without like stumbling at all. I can't.
There you go.
That never works with me. Damn, that's amazing.
I'm strangely a big fan of mountains, where like geographically, one side is always messed up and the other side is very perfect.
It's interesting, right? Yeah, it's a very good location.
And it's all because of the direction the wind blows and what that wind carries. It's a really fun topic. But yeah.
Dang, that was a good one.
Yeah.
I love it.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Your Rivers Are Wrong episode. This is 6, right? Episode 6?
Yeah.
Awesome. Episode 6. Join us again on episode 7, where we bring up other things that we love pertaining to the worlds of storytelling and map making and world building and the like. But for now, have a wonderful weekend, wherever you are, whenever you are. Mm-hmm. And always remember, your rivers are wrong.
Yeah, they're really wrong. And I can say it because I studied graphic design.
The expert has spoken.
Exactly.
Have a great day. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Your Rivers Are Wrong. If you have any questions, comments, or ideas for future episodes that you'd like to hear us cover, feel free to contact us at yourriversarewrong@gmail.com. Our intro and outro music is written by Maarten Schellekens. Thanks for that. And again, thank you so much for listening. We hope to see you at the next one.